All right, welcome to, I guess it's the last day of Summit. And personally, it's just been like so exciting this year. Like the keynote was like chock-a-block full of, things to come, forward-looking things. Who's excited about connectors? Thought as much. And of course, the native query planner, I know that. But I actually want to pause a little and look back. I mean, not nostalgically, but I just want to take stock of how far we've come and all our achievements, we've had. And I want to do this in the context of the old and the new, so the Apollo Gateway and the Apollo Router. But for starters, I want to do like a quick poll, Dan Berner style. How many people here at some point have been on the Gateway? Okay. Jesse. How many people are still on the Gateway or are thinking of moving to the router, in the process of moving to the router? Okay, fair amount. How many people are nervous about this move or don't want to do this or are scared with this move or have apprehensions about it? Okay, fewer than I thought. That's actually good news. But if you are, you're in the right place because we have an extraordinary panel today with extraordinary stories about how they took on this really scary task of, I don't know, like ripping out like this piece of infrastructure that's serving up all your production traffic. I mean, what's scary about that, right? And being able to do that with success. And even if you're not in the same place where you're thinking of migrating to the router, I think the lessons we are going to learn today or the experiences we're going to hear about are so sort of, I think, applicable to any big tech migrations that you undertake, right? And I think all of us have been there at some point, whether that's like a top-down mandate or tech debt, you're just like faced with this impossible task of moving on to something new, and it just seems impossible. Anyway, enough of me and the problem space, but let me introduce you to our wonderful panel. Samana.
Hi, I am Samana Shrestha. I'm on Wayfair's GraphQL platform team. Wayfair is currently on our way to just adopting Federation more widely as a company. We already have over 100 subgraphs in our system, but we're adding more every day. And so our team is really responsible for developing the tooling and just maintaining this infrastructure that's supporting our very rapidly growing federated ecosystem.
Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan, an engineering manager at RS Group. If you've not heard of RS Group, we're one of the world's largest electronic component resellers. We operate in about 32 different markets. My team is the data graph and content team, and we manage the federated graph. And much to Sam's point, we provide tooling for teams. And to give you a number of subgraphs, we've only got 8. But they're 8 amazing subgraphs, so that makes it better.
Of course,
Yep.
yeah. Great.
And I'm Braden Sebastian. I've been leading Zillow's GraphQL platform team for about 2.5 years. We're currently about 60 subgraphs. I've been growing a lot recently, so operating at 26,000 peak TPS, and I've been on the router for a year and loving it, so excited to speak to that.
Okay, awesome.
26,000 at peak.
We'll hear even more impressive numbers, Dan. Save that energy. Yeah. All right, so we know that all of you have gone and done that big, scary thing, right? But what was the start like? What was the motivation? I mean, you don't undertake these things like a hack week project or I'm free this week and I'm going to do this. What was that compelling need or what was that motivation to do this, Dan?
So for us, it was twofold. One, we had some new subgraphs coming online with substantial traffic needs, and we've all heard the stories of Router being faster. But the second one was we firmly believe that Router is the future. I mean, we've all heard it here today, connectors, entity caching, to name a few of the good stuff coming. So for us, it was much more of a business value proposition. We don't want to build those features. We want to leverage the vendor's technology. And for that to happen, we need to be on Router.
Yeah, so really investing in the future, right? It's not just about this is not working for me, but also anticipating that need or where that your business is going to go and being able to invest in the future for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Samana, what about you?
Yeah, so when we first deployed Federation, this was a couple years ago, we were actually using the Apollo Gateway implementation, the Node Gateway implementation. And for us, that was not scaling very well. We had just about 15% of our traffic going through, and we needed to run almost 300 containers in each data center, and this was costing about $4,000 each month, each data center. And we also needed to maintain this allow list of subgraphs because we wanted to make sure that we could actually handle that extra traffic before we add them to the graph. So this was just not a sustainable model. In order to get Federation at Wayfair to general availability, we decided we needed to switch to Router because, as everyone's been talking about, it just promised a lot of great wins, both in terms of resources and performance. And also timing was really important. So this was towards the end of 2022, we had our major Black Friday Cyber 5 sale event coming up. And we were honestly a little concerned about Gateway's ability to handle that extra spike of traffic that we were expecting over the weekend. So the decision was made, we have to have Router up and running before this big sale event.
So not only did you decide to do this big scary thing, you said, we will do it at the biggest time of our year. Let's just, I don't know, light a fire, see what goes wrong. So for you, again, it was not only about investing in the future, but your current situation was becoming untenable. You know, you just couldn't, sort of, it's not sustainable. Dan, was that the case for you as well? Like, was there a cost of delay? Like, if you had just stayed on the gateway, what would have happened?
So back to that original point, we can put more traffic through, and we knew that traffic was coming. Big fan of self-financing future growth. So that efficiency gain allowed us to self-finance the next stage in the evolution of the federated graph at RS Group and take on more subgraphs, more traffic. So yeah, it made complete sense in that regard.
Yeah. Okay, so you've shared a little bit about, you know, what was that push that made you make that move. Then how do you go about planning something like this? Like, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes thinking through, you need to look around the corners. So how do you prepare yourself for such a big event, Braden?
Yeah, so like all ambitious technical endeavors, it started with a technical design. So one of the talented engineers on our team, Seth, who's actually here today, put together a really rigorous design that both covered our existing customizations in Node.js, kind of laid out a plan for what had to be deprecated, what had to be migrated, also touched on a testing and validation strategy, and then a gradual release method that would let us control an incremental rollout to production to gauge success. From there, we had the information we needed to go to our stakeholders, share what was going to be deprecated, you know, ask for their support in getting this migration over the line. Thankfully, the ask was small enough, and also the return on investment in terms of, you know, giving them access to Federation V2, access to Apollo's enterprise features, you know, was able to get their buy-in, was quite non-contentious. And lastly, it was cool just to connect on, you know, being on the bleeding edge of the GraphQL spec and this really cool piece of technology we were introducing into our architecture.
So that's actually something that I want to, you know, you were talking about that as a plus, like cool technology, you know, GraphQL spec and Rust, but sometimes that can be a little bit scary. Was Rust a detractor for you? Like, did you feel like, gosh, you know, I'm going to sort of like put something that has Rust in my tech stack? Was that a problem for you?
Yeah, it was definitely something we wanted to be thoughtful about. So both tried to do some forecasting and how much Rust we anticipated needing to write, and kind of thinking through implications of, is this going to change how we hire and so on. Thankfully, the reality is you don't need to write Rust day to day to support the router. But fortunately, we have some really talented engineers on the team, some with past experience, others with you know, a voracious appetite to learn and get experience with this technology. So it's actually proven to be more of an asset, and we've since jumped in and built a few plugins, which has been really nice.
So you can lean in as much as you want, but you really don't need to sort of be able to dabble with that. What about you, Dan? What was your planning process like?
Very much the same. I have a talented engineer, Will. He's not here, unfortunately, but if he watches the video, shout out to that gentleman. We went through the stages as the same planning, and then we looked at what we built custom in the gateway. I'm sure people in this audience have all had that conversation. You've built a lot of business needs into the gateway. So we looked at ours, and then we took a look at what Router can provide. And we were like, actually, most of what we've built is now provided out of the box. It may not quite look the same, but we can get what we need in different ways. And so we took the decision to effectively deprecate near enough all of ours. In fact, I think we deprecated everything.
Okay.
It said, in the router, we're going to use as many native features. And going back to that configure, not buy approach and leveraging with vendors. And that has worked out great for us. We had a lot of custom metrics that were tied into a gateway. They all came in one shape or form via open telemetry of the router.
Yeah. And Braden, you touched upon this a little as well, right? Like, just like being opportunistic about, when you're faced with such a migration, not just trying to replicate the system, not trying to do like for like, the whole enchilada, but really being opportunistic about, do I really need this? What are the things that I can sort of shed? What are the things that I can deprecate? What are the solutions that are already provided out of the box? So I think that's a good way to narrow down that scope of that migration. So yeah, well done. And of course, we know that. And there's more coming, right? Like I know a lot of people who are on the gateway today, they're worried about their customization. So that is our actually motivation there to build more and more out of the box in the router. Okay, so now we know what happens with best laid plans. They all fall over. So what happened? Like, so you've meticulously planned this, you've anticipated this, but did it all go to plan, or did it just like crash and burn? Like, what were the learnings there? What is this something that you can share so that people who are in that process of planning right now can anticipate those things and prepare for that? Sam?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier we were trying to get ready for our major sale event. The team at the time did a really good job of just putting a very thorough stepwise approach to our adoption. It all actually went really well, but we did this in 4 key stages. At the beginning, we just had an instance of router running in our development environment, and we ran all of our federated traffic through that. We ran a lot of load tests. All of that went well. After that, we decided to use Istio's traffic mirroring to mirror our prod traffic to a router instance. Obviously, we had router set up to only accept queries at this time, so we weren't mirroring mutations. We got to use these steps to really work through some minor hiccups, minor kinks that we saw. And the 3rd stage, this was actually right before the sale event. We were feeling really good about our setup. But again, because the stakes were pretty high, we wanted to be super, super safe. So what we did was, first we set up gateway to proxy live traffic to our router. And that way we had gateway still available as like a fast fallback just in case we needed it. And then we also over-provisioned our router pods. So with gateway, we had each pod handling like 30 requests per second, and then we decided to 10x that. So each router pod was serving 300 requests per second, even though it probably could have handled more. But
I know you're definitely handling more than 300 requests per second right now. But.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But yeah, so that was our setup. We had like 300 pods of gateway, proxying traffic to around 40 pods of router. And it was a total success, no real issues throughout the event. Everything went smoothly. And so last stage was to just remove that proxy layer, have Istio just directly send traffic to router. And obviously, this was a super, super condensed version of what we actually did. The whole end-to-end adoption took, I think, around 5 months, but it was a total success.
But this first milestone of being able to serve traffic for Black Friday, you were able to achieve that.
Yep.
Wow, kudos on hitting that, working under pressure. What about you, Braden? What was your process like to plan this migration?
Yeah, so overall, the migration took us about 8 months. A lot of that being spent in testing and validation. Like to your question, Chandrika, like things tend to go wrong when you're doing migrations
Always.
at this scale. And much prefer that to happen during testing and validation than during the production release. So one lesson learned for us was as soon as you have a functioning early build ready, it's best to release to non-production as soon as possible. Like pulling forward any sort of indication of things that might not be working as expected or bugs you can get on top of, it's always valuable. Second thing is we invested in a few bits of custom validation tooling that helped us really test and be confident in the router before we rolled it out. So one of those things was a stub subgraph service that let us load test the router in isolation without subjecting our downstream dependencies to our top of our internet scale traffic. And the second thing, similar to what we saw in the keynote yesterday with the new native query planner running in validation mode to build confidence in production, we built a shadow traffic analysis tool that let us sample production traffic, particularly idempotent production traffic, so queries, not mutations, pull it outside of the critical path, and then do a simultaneous request to the gateway and the router and get two valuable bits of diagnostics out of that. So one was performance, apples to apples, how does the same request perform between the gateway and router? And second, we did an attribute level diff on the responses. So both of those actually caught a few forms of regression that would have been outages in production, some of them edge cases, and proved to be really valuable. So we've since actually platformized that shadow traffic tool, and our stakeholders are actively using that today.
Yeah. And I know that shadow traffic tool, there were lessons for us as well, because I think it caught a couple of bugs for us as well. But again, it goes back to that, right? Like reducing the surface, building in those baby steps. For you, it was queries, not mutations. For you, it was about just reducing the way you're testing and how, the surface area that you're testing. But the shadow traffic cool thing is, and you said, in the native query planner, we also saw earlier today in Irina's talk, and that really helps you build that confidence. And Irina, our lead engineer on the query planner, always talks about it as like open heart surgery. You're like sort of like ripping apart, like while you're serving production traffic, now you're trying to put something in the critical path, and it's scary, but and that's how you gain confidence with that. And actually, Braden, for you, I have brilliant numbers for Zillow, like in terms of like the match rate and the performance. So you're it for the native query planner after this, where we can talk about that later. Okay, now in terms of what happens after you've moved on to the router, right? Like, were you able to hit the goals? I know, Samna, one of your things was like to hit Black Friday, but what about your other goals? What were you hoping that you would achieve with the router, and were you able to achieve that, Dan?
So yeah, back to that point earlier about self-financing future growth, we, with the same infrastructure, managed to provide I think a 5x increase in throughput.
Okay.
With the same infrastructure, which is great, and that's enabling us to grow more without asking for additional financing. And then we also saw a 24% decrease in P95s, which is great. Again, that comes back to a business value we can attribute.
Yeah.
We've all had the conversations with speed and how that translates into conversions. And then there was obviously the business benefits as well.
Because there's also the tangible and the intangible benefits, right? Like there is this, we spoke about this, about the developer velocity, and it's not just like the performance improvements. But also, so Samna, you were talking about like how you had this 4-phase thing, you hit Black Friday, but what happened after that? Like after Black Friday to, where you are, what are the performance benefits that you're seeing?
Yeah, so after Black Friday, we had the ability to just really start to push the router, see what it can do, try different configurations.
Push it really far.
Yeah, and so we tried to see how much it can really handle. So initially we had gateway running or serving around 30 requests per second in each pod. With router, we were actually able to get to 1,000 requests per second, so that was a massive improvement. A funny story here, well, an interesting finding was as we were ramping up traffic to the router, what we realized was we started seeing some latency spikes and some CPU throttling, and we realized that this was coming from our Istio layer because the resources for the Istio layer, they weren't enough for that Istio layer to just handle the amount of traffic that router was able to handle.
Did you hear that, guys? Router engineers.
So we had to actually give Istio more resources so that it could just keep up with how good router was. But I digress. Our stats after we were able to do all the fine-tuning was for performance. Our P95 for internal processing time went from, with Gateway, was around 55 milliseconds, and we went down to 20 milliseconds. And this is actually still true. We're still running well under 20 milliseconds at P95, and that's awesome because the queries that we're running today are far, far more complex than the ones that we were running back in 2022. resources. We had around 300 pods with Gateway, and then we went down to just 20 pods in each data center with Router. And then obviously cost, I said earlier, we were paying around $4,000 each month, each data center. With Router, we went down to just $300 per month
Wow.
per data center. 93% reduction in cost, so that was
Drinks
awesome.
on you, Wayfair. Yeah.
And I think, so those were like performance metrics that we were watching. Something that we weren't expecting, or like something that we weren't really looking at, was the configurability of Router, just how easy it was to configure Router for different use cases. So with Gateway, we had to add custom code if we wanted to deploy it for a development use case or anything like that. But with Router, we could just deploy different instances and configure it to be serving whatever use case it's serving. So, for example, we have an isolated deployment of Router today that powers our Apollo Studio Explorer.
Okay.
And this version allows you to introspect our production schema. This is only available internally, and this is the same instance of Router that our other Wayfair developers use for testing features while they're developing, pre-production testing, load testing, and all of that stuff. So it's been really great.
Okay. So that's a happy outcome, right? Like, obviously, you've hit all the metrics, all the performance improvements, the cost gains, but also like this configurability of the router, which is allowing you to test it in different ways. Dan, you and I were talking about that as well. Like, were there some other unexpected benefits that came out of the router for you?
So developer experience.
Yeah.
Like the new, who here uses Rover Dev? Yeah, I'd imagine more of you will soon. We had custom toolboxing that we call it a toolbox, and it allowed us to bring down a development environment. We're going to get rid of it. That's going to be sent to the bin. We're going to move to
You're welcome.
Dev. Yeah, but back to that original question, that router is the future.
Yeah.
And it's really starting to bear fruit in terms of developer experience. We're getting rid of our custom stuff, going over to the new subgraph mock-in systems as well that Rover Dev provides, and back to the configurability as well. We're already seeing much quicker turnaround in changes.
Yeah.
Engineers find it much easier to pick up, work with their configurations. So back to that, every line of code I don't need to own is a plus.
And that's what we're about, right? Like, you've heard been that underlying theme throughout the conference about how GraphQL is hard, how getting started is hard. So at Apollo, we're always thinking about, like, how can we get you to do less work? How can we get our customers to do less work? How can we get them to own less, like in terms of like whether it's like solutions or tooling? And that's forever at the forefront of not just like in terms of like the cool features we're shipping, but also like the developer experience of that. What about you, Braden? What surprised Zillow? Were there any unexpected benefits?
Yeah, a really cool added benefit for us was the observability. So while we're on the gateway, we would constantly be in interactions with stakeholders where they were seeking, okay, like just how much latency is this going to add?
Yeah.
And fighting that battle between GraphQL and REST, and us trying to reframe that thinking, and the router giving us access to the isolated router level latency was super interesting and helpful on that front. And that metric is actually, like, I think our P50 is sub-millisecond, so a really cool stat to share as well. Beyond that, the extensibility of the router, and we've had a few one-off opportunities to write a custom plugin to monitor cookie size and so on, and just leverage our place in the enterprise architecture and these scrappy little plugins to add value and bring clarity to our stakeholders. So that's also been really valuable.
So while we talked about how there was so much customization in the gateway and the router, a lot of things was out of the box, but still maintaining those extension points where you are able to self-serve and everything is not like a product request to Apollo. And observability, right? Like, it's not just about, I have performance improvements, obviously cost improvements like speak for themselves, but being able to demonstrate that this is how you're doing it. Okay, and I know that all of you are at different scales in terms of like, how many requests you're running. But what does next week, next month, next year look like? You have massive scale running on your routers right now. Samana, what is lacking perhaps, or what are the current struggles? Where do you want to be with our platform?
Yeah, so I think we're serving around almost 1 billion requests per day, so we have scaled up pretty quickly. And just given our scale and the increasing complexity of our operations, we are starting to see these consistent spikes in resource usage for Router during the query planning phase. So
That's going to go away, you know that.
Yep, very much relates to what Irina was talking about this morning. So we are very excited to move on to the Rush Query Planner and see the benefits of that upgrade. I think another thing, again, given our scale, we want to keep Router upgrades to a minimum. We want to just stick to stable versions, and for that, we are really looking forward to LTS versioning
support. That is my baby, yes.
And I think we've been talking about plugins. We've also added some in-house plugins at Wayfair as well. For example, we added an in-house operation registry, so we could allow list operations that can run in production. But we want to obviously move on to persistent queries and just use all of these new features that Apollo has been releasing so that we can rely on the custom plugins less. And I think coprocessors are really cool. They're like a newer alternative to plugins, and we haven't really had the opportunity to try those yet, but we have used some RAI plugins, and those have been super straightforward to work with. So all in all, great stuff.
Yeah, I can't wait for you to try out coprocessors. And again, extensibility is something like we're constantly thinking of, like new ways, new points of engaging with the router. But what about you, Braden? Like, has the success criteria changed for you now? Is it like a moving target? I know you're like serving massive scale with Zillow. So what is it that you want to sort of build on next in your platform?
Yeah, so now that we've modernized our infrastructure and have kind of removed like technical constraints to scaling, we're now thinking a lot about how do we play our role as a platform team in helping the supergraph evolve in an intentional way, and doing so through both governance, through enabling our stakeholders, building some tooling around that. So have some effort in flight on that front, and are actually like very grateful for the Apollo schema visualization tool, which has been helpful on that front, and would love anything else you could give us that can help us support our stakeholders in that way.
Yeah, no, you're in luck, because again, governance has been like, especially like I think when we sort of really recommend the federated way of working, governance is very absolutely top of mind for us, and we would be investing that a lot. In fact, I was just talking to Jesse. It's sometimes at Apollo we say there's like life before summit and life after summit. So we'll all probably like take tomorrow to travel back to where we are, but come Monday, it's back to the drawing board, back to innovation, back to keeping up with your traffic and your demands and the pace at which all of you are growing. And hopefully we can stay ahead of you a few steps and continue to deliver solutions that help you achieve your business objectives. But hopefully, a big round of applause for our panelists here today. And hopefully we can all walk away with some lessons that helps us sort of, take that leap of faith across whatever chasm that looms in front of you. So good luck with your tech migration. Thank you.
Awesome.